when you just testified a minute ago that you didn't know if critical race theory was taught in K through 12, I will confess I find that statement a little hard to reconcile with the public record, because if you look at the Georgetown Day School's curriculum, it is filled and overflowing with critical race theory. That among the books that are either assigned or recommended, they include Critical Race Theory, an introduction. They include The End of Policing, an advocacy for abolishing police. They include How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. They include literally stacks and stacks of books, and I'll tell you two of the ones that were most stunning. They include a book called Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram Kendi. And there are portions of this book that I find really quite remarkable. One portion of the book says babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There is no neutrality. Another portion of the book, they recommend to babies confess when being racist. Now, this is a book that is taught at Georgetown Day School to students in pre-K through second grade, so 4 through 7 years old. Do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist?
Senator, I do not believe that any child should be made to feel as though they are racist, or though they are not valued, or though they are less than, that they are victims, that they are oppressors. I don't believe in any of that. But what I will say is that when you asked me whether or not this was taught in schools, critical race theory, my understanding is that critical race theory as an academic theory is taught in law schools, and to the extent that you were asking the question, I understood you to be addressing public schools. Georgetown Day School, just like the religious school that Justice Barrett was on the board of, is a private school.
Okay, so you agree critical race theory is taught at Georgetown Day School?
I don't know, because the board is not, the board does not control the curriculum. The board does not focus on that. That's not what we do as board members, so I'm actually not sure.
Well, and I'll note that the board is chaired by Professor Fairfax, your college roommate who introduced you yesterday, so the two of you serve on the board together. Another book that is on the summer reading for 3rd through 5th grade is a book called Stamped for Kids, again by Ibram Kendi. I read the entirety of the book, and I will say it is an astonishing book. On page 33, it asks the question, can we send white people back to Europe? That's on 33. That's what's being given to 8 and 9 years old. It also, on page 115, says the idea that we should pretend not to see racism is connected to the idea that we should pretend not to see color. It's called color blindness. Skipping ahead, here's what's wrong with this. It's ridiculous. Skin color is something we all absolutely see. Skipping ahead, so to pretend not to see color is pretty convenient if you don't actually want to stamp out racism in the first place. Now, what this book argues for is the exact opposite of what Dr. King spoke about on the floor of the Lincoln Memorial. And are you comfortable with these ideas being taught to children as young as 4 in respect to the first book, as young as 8 and 9 in respect to the second book?
Senator, I have not reviewed any of those books, any of those ideas. They don't come up in my work as a judge, which I'm respectfully here to address.
There is apparently a concern on your side, Mr. Chairman, about whether you have on your side of the aisle access to all the information that we have on this side of the aisle and all the information that's in the possession of the White House. During a break earlier today, I met with the ranking member, Senator Grassley, his staff, and with White House staff to discuss it. Here's my understanding of what has transpired. Last Wednesday, evening, the senator from Missouri selected a handful of Judge Jackson's more than 1,000 district court cases to claim that Judge Jackson, quote, endangers our children, close quote. On Thursday, the next day, the White House contacted Judge Jackson's chambers to request the probation office recommendation in each of the cases. I underline probation office. That probation office provided a chart reflecting these recommendations. This is the sum total of what was provided. They shared with the White House from the chambers. When the senator from Missouri continued to raise questions and request the probation office's recommendation in these cases, the probation office provided this chart reflecting those recommendations, which was shared with the White House. When the senator from Missouri continued to raise questions about Judge Jackson's sentencing record, my staff asked the White House for information about the probation office recommendations. These are just numbers for each one of the cases. That's all that is. The White House and my office didn't have this information earlier because we didn't know the senator from Missouri was going to make this claim in the first place. Once the Republican side requested the same information, my staff shared it within minutes. So now your side, Senator, has exactly what the White House and the Democratic side has, the same chart provided by the probation office. And I might add that some of this had been published in the press, in Washington Post and other places, but it consists in each case of the case number, name, the probation office recommendation for custody, the sentence imposed custody, probation office recommended supervision and release, and the supervision and release imposed. All of that information has now been shared equally. Some information on the other side, on the Republican side, includes frequent reference to transcripts, which we don't have on this side. And the reason being we didn't anticipate this objection from the senator from Missouri and request that information. Now, the letter also goes a step beyond, which I think is a very important decision for this committee to make. This request for pre-sentence reports from each of these cases. Now, these pre-sentence reports are typically filed under seal. They can contain highly sensitive personal information, not just about the defendant, but about innocent third parties and victims. We've spent a lot of time here reflecting on these terrible crimes. Everyone has acknowledged how terrible they are and how damaging they can be to the victims. We have heard story after story, and I don't question a single word that was spoken in sympathy for these same victims. I would not want it weighing on my conscience that we are turning over these pre-sentence reports to this committee for the first time in history, and that information out of this, or because it was released, would somehow compromise or endanger any victim as a result of it. This information was not requested before. It's never been requested by this committee. And I think we ought to think long and hard about whether or not we even consider going into pre-sentence reports. So I'm going to take this matter up with our side, and I'm sure you will with your side. I have your letter requesting it. As far as this information, you have exactly what we have, no more, no less. In terms of pre-sentence reports, this is a critical policy question which ought to be carefully weighed. It goes way beyond, I'm sorry, Senator Judge Jackson, it goes way beyond your nomination. And I want to make certain that we don't take a step here that endangers the lives or well-being of innocent people.
Mr. Chairman, since you just responded to the letter that I wrote and was submitted on behalf of 10 senators, I will point out that in Judge Jackson's answer to Senator Hawley, she said that he and this committee did not have sufficient information to assess her sentencing decisions because we heard the arguments of the prosecutors in the transcript, but we did not have the recommendation from the probation office. And what she testified under oath is you can't understand why she issued her sentences without having those probation reports. You are right that there can be sensitive victim information in those reports, and everyone on this side, I'm confident, would agree to redacting out any information that would violate the privacy of a victim. But Judge Jackson has told us it is relevant to understanding those cases, and that's why 10 of us have requested we have those reports, and there's explicit statutory authority for us to do so that is cited in the letter we just submitted.
Senator, I don't know where other members of your caucus stand on the basic question of this nomination. They can decide on their own, and they will, and they should. That is their responsibility. I think I know where you're headed. And I would just suggest that we ought to think long and hard, my friends, about members of the Judiciary Committee endangering the lives of innocent people to pursue this line of questioning. We spent 2 days, 15, 16, 17, 18 hours, and a large part of it on this issue. I don't believe these pre-sentencing reports are going to change anyone's disposition if they're going to vote on this issue. And I do not want it weighing on my conscience that I gave the green light to release this information so that it might endanger the lives of innocent victims. I'm sorry. That's a bridge too far for me. I think the issue before us on sentencing, you each had a chance to hear plenty of testimony on it. And I believe this should be taken up with the individual caucuses on both sides, if you wish. But that to me it's gone way too far. Way too far. I don't want it on my conscience.
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Senator,
one, I agree with you. I've prosecuted literally thousands of people. I would have to go back. It's over 8 years. I can't remember the hundreds of sentencings I was at where we had pre-sentence reports over and over again. There were things in there that were sensitive, sometimes reflecting somebody who were putting their lives on the line to even give a report. Neither the defense counsel nor I as a prosecutor ever thought those would be made public. And we assumed the judges, we had judges across the political stripes who read them, kept the confidence of that. As a result, we knew that the reports were thorough. And a judge has the final say, but as a prosecutor, I might have a recommendation, but I never question a judge who might give a different sentence, because my responsibility as prosecutor, theirs was the sentence.
Senator Lee.
Yeah, might I just weigh in here? I totally understand the concern that you're describing relative to the confidential nature of pre-sentence reports. As a prosecutor and as a law clerk, I reviewed those with some regularity, and I understand the sensitivity of them. Let me suggest a couple of things. First of all, it's not unusual for us as a committee and as members of the United States Senate to review materials that would be inappropriate for public release. I don't think one of us is suggesting that. There are means by which we can review things in a classified environment and treat them as classified. We've done that with significant success in this hearing. Secondly, to the extent that wouldn't provide the level of comfort necessary, we'd also be happy to review them on a redacted basis. These are things that have become relevant in our conversations. We want to make sure that we have the facts, but not one of us wants to endanger anyone or to render public information that is sensitive in nature. There are abundant ways around that.
I would suggest that the information contained in these reports is dangerous to the victims and to the innocent people who are mentioned in these reports, and unnecessary at this point. It's never been requested by this committee, and it's merely a fishing expedition in dangerous territory. Classified settings, redacted versions of the reports. This has never happened in the history of this committee. And I would say, Senator, I will just tell you, I am not going to be party to turning over this information and endangering the life of an innocent person for a political quest to find more information. We have exhausted this topic, and we've gone to it over and over again. And I think that this is a bridge too far for this committee. That's my personal feeling. I take it that Senator Leahy may agree with me in that regard. This nominee has been before this committee for 18 hours. I don't believe that this information is going to change anyone's vote. You can decide in your caucus what you want to do to go forward. I've told you my position. I want to proceed if I can. I thank the nominee for waiting for this colloquy, and I turn it over to Senator Cotton. Cruz of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Jackson, congratulations on your nomination. 11,107 men and women have served as members of the House of Representatives. 1,994 men and women have served as members of the United States Senate. Only 115 men and women have served as Supreme Court justices. The position to which you have been nominated is extraordinarily important. And that is why the Senate is given the responsibility for advice and consent under the Constitution. Because the job matters immensely. Supreme Court confirmations were not always controversial. In fact, Bushrod Washington, when nominated to the Supreme Court in 1798, was confirmed the very next day. So what changed? Well, what changed is starting in the 1960s and the 1970s, the Supreme Court's role in our society changed dramatically. The Supreme Court became a policy-making body rather than a merely judicial body. Just a moment ago, my colleague, Senator Klobuchar, said we should consider the Supreme Court's place in our democracy. Well, starting in the 60s and 70s, the Supreme Court decided its place in our democracy, at least too many justices, was to set aside the democratic decisions of the people and instead to mandate the policy outcomes they themselves supported. Our Democratic colleagues want the Supreme Court to be anti-democratic. Our Democratic colleagues get frustrated with the democratic process. When they can't pass gun control laws because the American people don't support them, they want unelected judges to mandate those same laws instead. Law after law after law that they can't get through the democratic process, the Democrats have decided it's much simpler to convince 5 lawyers in black robes than to try to convince 330 million Americans. That is why Supreme Court confirmation hearings have become so contentious, is because the Supreme Court has arrogated to itself a responsibility the Constitution doesn't give it, which is to make contested policy decisions and take them away from the American people. Now, what should this hearing be and what should it not be? Well, you've heard a number of members on the Republican side of the aisle quite clear on what it should not be. This will not be a political circus. This will not be the kind of character smear that sadly our Democratic colleagues have gotten very good at. And it's important to note, a couple of years ago I was doing my weekly podcast and I was on with a noted liberal intellectual who made a comment something to the effect of, well, both sides do this. Both sides smear Supreme Court justices. And I was forced to laugh out loud and say, look, I understand that's a pretty good talking point. It just happens not to be true. It is only one side of the aisle, the Democratic aisle, that went so into the gutter with Judge Robert Bork that they invented a new verb, to bork someone. It is only one side of the aisle that with Justice Clarence Thomas was so reprehensible that, as the president who nominated him, President George Herbert Walker Bush, wrote at the time, quote, "What's happening to Clarence Thomas is just plain horrible. All the groups that tried to beat him up on abortion or affirmative action have now come out of the woodwork. They are trying to destroy a decent man. This is an ugly process, and one can see clearly why so many good people elect to stay out of public life." As Justice Thomas observed in that hearing, what happened there was, to use his words, a high-tech lynching. And I would note the chairman who presided over that disgrace was Joe Biden. And then most of the members of this committee remember the confirmation hearing of Brett Kavanaugh, one of the lowest moments in the history of this committee, where Democrats on this committee sat on allegations, didn't refer them to the FBI, didn't ask for investigations, hid them, and then leaked them against the wishes of the complainant. And we began a circus that featured Spartacus moments, featured such nuts as Michael Avenatti, whom CNN breathlessly for some months described as a possible Democratic presidential candidate. That's before, presumably, he became a felon in recent months. Judge Jackson, I can assure you that your hearing will feature none of that disgraceful behavior. No one is going to inquire into your teenage dating habits. No one is going to ask you with mock severity, do you like beer? But that's not to say this hearing should be non-substantive and non-vigorous. In this hearing, this committee has a responsibility to focus on issues, to focus on your record, to focus on substance, to do our very best to ascertain what kind of justice you would be. And a couple of straw men. It is no longer the case that Supreme Court confirmation hearings are merely about qualifications. There are some who say, well, if the justice is qualified, the Senate should confirm. There was a time that was the case. Our Democratic colleagues have abandoned that standard long ago. Our Democratic colleagues, then Senator Joe Biden was perfectly happy to vote against John Roberts, someone who was unquestionably qualified for the court. He was perfectly happy to vote against Sam Alito, someone who was unquestionably qualified for the court. And indeed, every member of our Democratic colleagues who was here at the time participated in the first ever filibuster of a Supreme Court justice on partisan lines with Justice Neil Gorsuch. They did so for someone unquestionably qualified, but they had a political agenda, and so every one of them happily filibustered Justice Gorsuch. Likewise, it's not about race. We will see Democrats in the media suggest that any senator that is skeptical of your nomination, that questions you vigorously, or that dares to vote against you must somehow harbor racial animus. If that were the standard, I would note we are sitting on a committee where multiple members of this committee, the senior Democrats in the committee, happily filibustered Judge Janice Rogers Brown, a very qualified African-American woman nominated to the D.C. Circuit, and they did so precisely because they wanted to prevent Judge Brown from becoming Justice Brown, the first African-American woman. Joe Biden was among the Democrats filibustering the first African-American woman nominated to the D.C. Circuit. The senior Democrats on this committee also filibustered Miguel Estrada. As the staff for Senator Ted Kennedy said in writing at the time, the Democrats filibustered Miguel Estrada, quote, because he is Hispanic. They were explicitly racial. If you are Hispanic or African American and you dare depart from their political orthodoxy, they will crush you, they will attack you, they will slander you, they will filibuster you. So this is not about race. It is, however, about issues and substance. And I got to say, I agree with Chairman Durbin. Chairman Durbin quoted Paul Simon, and he said, history will judge, quote, did she restrict freedom or did she expand it? I agree with that. The reason the American people care about the Supreme Court is it is integral to protecting or taking away our constitutional rights. When it comes to free speech, this committee should inquire, will you protect the rights of Americans to speak, to say unpopular ideas, to say ideas that the government doesn't want you to say, that you nonetheless have a right to say? Will you protect freedom or restrict it? When it comes to religious liberty, will a justice vote to protect your right to live according to your faith and according to your conscience? Or will a justice vote to crush religious liberty and strip those rights away? The Second Amendment. Will a justice vote to defend your Second Amendment rights to keep and bear arms, to defend your family, to defend your children? Or will a justice roll over to the Democrats that want a disarmed citizenry? And the right to life. Will a justice protect the rights of the people, the rights of state legislatures to enact laws protecting innocent life, protecting unborn life, stopping abominations like partial birth abortion? Or will a justice view her job as a super legislator striking down all such rights? School choice. Will a justice protect the rights of kids to get a quality education, or will a justice legislate from the bench and shut down school choice programs across this country? And crime. We are seeing murder rates carjacking rates, crime rates skyrocketing across the country. In significant part because political Soros-backed district attorneys, because of Democratic efforts to abolish the police. And part of the Democratic effort to abolish the police is nominating justices that consistently side with violent criminals, release violent criminals, refuse to enforce the law, and that results in jeopardizing innocent citizens. So all of those questions are fair game. Will you follow the law? What does your record indicate? Will you protect the rights of every American citizen, regardless of race, regardless of party, regardless of views? That's what the focus of this hearing should be.